Hello grade 10 and welcome to this video about personal project assessment. Now assessment of the personal project comes right at the end when you're writing your report. Your report is reflecting on all the things that you've done throughout the process. So you don't need to be worrying about this too much now. You need to be focusing on documenting your work and creating your particular product or outcome. You probably do want to know what the assessment is so you can have it in the back of the mind, and also so that you can see how the process journal is going to support the assessment. So just a warning, this presentation is super wordy. There's loads of text on screen, which is something that I hate doing. However, it's there if you want to read it. As I go through this video, I'm not going to read every single part, and that will make sense to you in a second. So at the moment, really what you should be focusing on is just documenting the process in your process journal. You should have lots and lots of entries, and they will look different for every single student. If a student is making a dress and learning about textile craft in Mexico, they're going to have fabric samples in their process journal. They're going to have experiments of stitching. If you're doing a science report, you're going to have experiments documented. So they're all going to look different. There are some things that we will have which are similar, and we'll go through that in a minute, but really at the moment just focus on documenting everything. Please never edit or delete process journal entries. Really what you want to think about is you want to have a huge selection of entries. So when you come to write the report, you can select the best and most relevant entries. Because you're doing this project over a long time, you might not realize that something is relevant now. You might look back at the end and think about a really important skill you learn or a real turning point in your project. What you want to do is have those 10 entries at the end. Your supervisor can help you select the process journal entries that will best support your report, but then you're also going to use more than those 10 entries. So you might use a source evaluation as evidence of your research. However, you might go back through your journal and name drop some books that you read, tell us about some facts that are in there. You will have those 10 entries as evidence at the back of your process journal, but your whole process journal is going to make it so easy to make a fabulous report. You can also think about it as a back catalogue of songs. You're a recording artist, you have so many songs. As you release each album, you don't think about, oh, this one will be great on the best of album. You just keep producing fantastic music, and at the end you pick those songs for your record. You also, when you make your best of album, you're going to be picking songs that are going to demonstrate different types of skills or different parts. Just like when you come to write your report, you're going to pick evidence that links to different strands. So, what we're going to do now, we will look at each strand. I will tell you kind of what they're looking for to get a 7 or 8 for each strand. And we're going to think about the process journal entries that might be evidence for that strand. So we're going to start with Criterion A right at the beginning, investigating. The first strand is to find a clear goal and global context for the project based on personal interests. Now this is 3 parts, right? So you really might have to go back and look at your process journal entries and kind of edit and push them together. Again, when they're looking for the clear goal, you can see here it says highly challenging. So that goal cannot just be about a product or outcome, it must be about the learning. It will really help you if you have words from your global context right in there so we can see exactly how the goal and global context link, and then you're going to talk to us a bit about your personal interests. So here you might have brainstorming to decide your goal. You might have facts, stats, quotes, figures to tell us why your goal is important. For example, if you are your product is going to be creating goodie bags for homeless shelters and your goal is learning about homelessness in your city, your facts, stats and quotes might be about the number of homeless people in your city. You're going to tell us why your global context is important to your goal, and maybe also tell us why it's important big picture. So maybe you're learning about how inequalities exist in your local community. Tell us why that's big picture important. Maybe talk about a UN global goal or how that links to other issues that are happening in the news right now. You are going to talk a little bit about your personal interests, so how did you decide to do this project? And you might even have an entry where you talk about improving your goal. So last week we looked at changing our goal from being about the product or outcome to creating it to be big picture, about the learning and the link to the global context. Maybe you have a short entry where you've talked about that. That would be a fantastic entry for this strand. Strand 2, identify prior learning and subject-specific knowledge relevant to the project. This is really about prior learning and subject-specific knowledge. So the personal project is the culminating project for the end of the MYP. They really want to know what you've learned during the 5 years of MYP. How does this demonstrate that learning? So you're going to talk about what you already know about that topic. You might tell us about a topic that you've learned in school which relates to your project, or skills. So for example, you might be doing a topic which you're like, oh, I have not done anything like this in school at all. I'm going to be making dog toys for an animal shelter. I've never made toys. I've never done anything in an animal shelter. But maybe you've learned about sewing in design class. Or maybe it's more of a soft skill or an approach to learning. Maybe you have had to learn communication skills like interviewing people in your Spanish language acquisition class, which you're going to use when you're interviewing experts in the field. So this part students sometimes struggle with. In the report, students often talk about just their personal learning and interests. That's in strand 1. This is really about school related. If you are having any difficulty with this, please let me know. I'm happy to help. And the next one, this is super long. This is about your research skills. What you can see here is that you need to see a wide variety of sources. You need to explicitly evaluate your sources, so tell us why they are reliable, credible, important, why they relate to your goal. Tell us the limitations and strengths of your goal, and make sure it links to your goal. So I said goal before I meant research. Consider limitations and strengths of your research and link it to your goal. They're also going to be looking, if you want to get a top mark for this, they want to make sure that your bibliography at the end of your report is properly formatted. I recommend MLA 8, and it's in alphabetical order. They want to make sure you've done in-text citations throughout your report. And all of this we will cover later in the year when we're really looking at the report. But research skills, even though you have this part of your report where you're writing about research skills, you can show off your research skills throughout the whole report. So, possible entries, research plans, source evaluations, interviews, annotated bibliographies, lab reports, graphs, charts, feedback, surveys. This is also an ATL. So the 5 ATLs are mentioned in the strands of the personal project assessment. What I want to say here is if you are someone who is just doing chronological process journal entries where you're just documenting what you do each week or every few days, you might have just a little bit of research included in all of those. So for example, today I watched this TED Talk and I learned this from that. Today I read one chapter from this book and it taught me that X. Having something like a source evaluation, an annotated bibliography, having something where you combine your research is really, really, really good, because then when you choose your process journal, which you're going to have as evidence for research, boom, you can show your source evaluation that shows 5 awesome sources that you have looked at. You've evaluated each source. You've told us what information from each source links to your goal. So I recommend doing that. If you look at Veracross, I've put in some research plans, annotated bibliography documents, and other templates there. This is also the first ATL that is mentioned. So let's look at this ATL spreadsheet I have. ATLs by the IB are kind of broken down. So that research is firstly broken down into information literacy skills and media literacy skills. And then it has these little boxes which really show you how they evaluate those things. So you might have been making connections between different sources. You might collect, record, and verify data. In my last school, some students would write a process journal entry where they had picked out maybe 3 or 4 of these little boxes and they described how they had done that. So that could be the process journal entry they pick. So moving on, we are now on Criterion B Planning. This first one, people often struggle with it. It's about developing your criteria for your product or outcome. So your big picture goal could be about learning how images can manipulate people or raise awareness for an issue. Your product or outcome could be a series of photographs linked to raising awareness of human rights issues. This is going to be the criteria for that particular product or outcome. You probably want to say how you got there first. So for example, I'm looking at homelessness. I decide that I want my product to be a donation of socks to a homeless shelter. Tell us how you made that leap from the big goal to your product or outcome. And then you really need to break down your criteria into very specific things. You should be used to this from design. It's thinking about the function, the aesthetic, the cost, etc. This part, though, really is talking about how you developed it. So don't just tell us what your specifications are. For example, I am making a music video. I analysed 8 music videos that all won awards recently. My favourite one was Beyonce's Single Ladies, which was shot all in black and white. Therefore, one of my specifications is that my video will also be black and white. Or my product is going to be goodie bags to donate to a homeless shelter. When I did my research, I found out that one of the most requested items from homeless people is socks and sanitary pads for women. Therefore, my packs will include socks and sanitary pads. So this is another time where you can show off your research, and you really want us to not just know that this is your criteria that you have created, show off all the kind of experts that have helped you. So show off the websites, the books, etc. that have helped you develop this criteria. So possible entries could be just a write-up of how your research has impacted your criteria. Or you could say something like, oh, I used this template that I used in design to help me create it. Or maybe you created your criteria and then you had an expert look at it. Maybe you had to go through a process and edit because you realized loads of your criteria was subjective and you had to change that. I have put at the bottom of this slide tips for writing your success criteria, and you can see it really breaks it down here. Just like design, it has aesthetics, safety, resources. I have examples all the way through, so this should really help you. But again, Veracos has more information on there. And again, because this is something you have done in design, if you need to speak to me or the other design teachers to get help, you can. Next one, plan and record the development process of your project. So this is really going to be kind of the broadest one. Your process journal entries could look completely different. So for example, your process journal entries could be you photographs of a workshop you attended learning how to sew. It could be photographs of you building something in a wood shop. It could be paint experiments. This is basically all the things you do between deciding your goal and doing your research and then creating your final product. So these are all going to look completely different. If you feel like your product or outcome, maybe it isn't something physical, or maybe you actually make the final product or outcome in one day, so you're not sure about how you'll document this, come and speak to me and I can help you. Again, because your product or outcome is one part of your goal project, this can be all different elements. So for example, maybe you are making these goodie bags to donate to a homeless shelter, but maybe part of that is not just buying a bag, filling it with stuff, donating it. Part of your goal might be learning about homelessness through interviewing people who are homeless. So if you have that big picture goal, the process is much bigger. So think about how the different elements that you have had to do to reach your goal and be successful. Next one is demonstrate self-management skills. Again, this is a really long, rambling description of a 7 to 8. What I've highlighted is organizational skills, affective skills, and reflective skills. Why? Because it's another ATL. Something that people really struggle with when they come to write the report is as soon as they see that word self-management, they think straight away about time management. So they'll tell me about just about, I don't know, making a Gantt chart, or just about how they manage their time. The IB criticised schools for this. It's one of the things that they send out every single year to MYP and PP coordinators. They say students across the world keep just talking about time management. They never talk about other organisational skills, effective or reflective. Some of those things you might not necessarily know what demonstrates effective skills. So once again, we have this spreadsheet here. If we go into self-management, you'll see there's loads of different indicators. A lot of effective skills are to do really with stress and anxiety, or dealing with things that go wrong. So again, document everything that happens in the process of making a product outcome. Don't edit stuff. And some of these things you're all doing anyway. Keep a journal to record reflections, reflective skills. You're probably all already doing that. Things like bring necessary equipment and supplies to class. That doesn't have to be to class. If you are filming a music video, you might have a list in your process journal where you've said what camera equipment you need, what lighting you need, etc., etc. So, yes, that was really, really long, but if you look at that spreadsheet, it will help you understand what those are. Self-management skills could be Gantt charts. It could be documenting things that went well. It could be talking about how you deal with stress. You could be using meditation, calm.com, Headspace. You could be managing your time. Again, don't just talk about time through different apps that help you manage time. It can be evidence of how you've kept up your relationship with your supervisor. Have you been doing it through email? How do you document your meetings? It could be next step plans or to-do lists. It could be dealing with the unexpected. Maybe you decided that you were going to film your music video on November 1st, and then the day that you wanted to film, it was raining so much that you had to change it. How did you reschedule? Maybe you've been keeping your process journal as a bullet journal to talk about how that has helped you manage yourself. Reflections on your own strengths and weaknesses, and then evidence of how people have helped you with that. So, for example, if English is your second language, have you had ELA to support you? Maybe you know that you are someone who really, really, really struggles with procrastination. Maybe you spoke to your parents and got them to help you, give you an extra kick, or maybe your homeroom teacher. Tell us how you've addressed those weaknesses. And Criterion C, taking action. So this is the part about making the product. Now you might notice that really your product is not assessed. When you upload your final report with your 10 process journal entries and your bibliography, you also upload either 5 photographs of your product or 30 seconds video of your product. But really, because to do a fantastic product or outcome, you have to work hard in the process, and this assesses the process. It really does assess the product. But you will see also that here, create a product outcome in response to the goal, global context, or criteria. Here really is a chance to show off what you've created. So if you built a computer from scratch, something which is incredibly hard, tell us about it. Tell us why it's hard and how you did it. Your possible entries, it could be telling us about the specific steps. You could be showing us similar projects and how yours is good or better. You could be telling us lots of technical things you did, maybe using specific vocabulary to do with techniques you've used, maybe software you've learned. Again, link this all to the global context. So talk about how your product or outcome, so the physical thing you make, links to your big picture goal. Okay, thinking skills. This is one of the longest ones. Again, I've highlighted critical thinking skills, creative thinking skills, and transfer. Hopefully that is a indicator that thinking skills is an ATL. Thinking skills. You and I think every day. We're constantly thinking, we're constantly problem solving. Our brains are busy working. However, if you ask me, tell me about the thinking you've done today, I would kind of panic because it seems so vague or abstract. But again, as it's an ATL, we have the spreadsheet, and it really is very practical and tactile things in there, like interpreting data or designing new machines, media, or technology. If you design a game or an app, that counts there. Applying skills and knowledge in an unfamiliar situation. Let's have a look at that ATL spreadsheet again, and you will see, if you look through this, you can easily pull out 1 or 2 things from each column. Again, make sure you're talking about all 3 skills that you can demonstrate in your report. Evaluating and managing risk. Maybe you had to build something that might have been unsafe, so you had to make sure that you were safe. There's things here, creating original works and ideas. Maybe you did some artwork. I'm sure you did brainstorming at the beginning of your project. So this spreadsheet, really use it because it will break down something that seems vague, like thinking, into these tactile, practical things. So moving on, Criterion C is super sneaky because now we have communication and social skills. Communication and social skills are the last 2 ATLs. So instead of thinking about the process journal entries, I would recommend just going to here, looking at communication and seeing which things you have done. You could talk about how you have communicated with your supervisor throughout the process. Maybe you've made your product or outcome for a target audience. How do you communicate that to them? Maybe you've worked with experts. Maybe you've interviewed people. Maybe you're going to do a presentation where you're showing your project. Social, again, this is collaboration. Sometimes I have students who are focusing on social and collaboration, And they think, well, the personal project is independent, it's personal, it's about me. I feel nervous saying about people I've collaborated with. Think about all the academics who hold PhDs. Think about all the engineers and scientists. Think about astronauts. Everyone successful has to collaborate with people to show that off. How did you use your supervisor to help you? Which experts did you speak to? And again, there's some indicators here to help you with that, but really show off which other people have helped you be successful in your project. Now moving on to Criterion D, reflecting. Criterion D, reflecting, you're going to find that this is much shorter than the other ones because at some point you can, instead of picking out a specific process journal entry for a strand here, you can talk about process journal entries you've already mentioned. And the reason I mention that is that you get to choose 10 process journal entries, but you might have noticed there's 12 strands. But I will show you how to do that here. The first one, however, you can't do that. The first one is evaluating the quality of your product or outcome against their criteria. So it's just thinking about that criteria you've made. Hopefully when you developed the criteria, you talked about how you can be successful for each strand. If you've met every single strand easily in your criteria, maybe your criteria wasn't challenging enough, so I really recommend doing challenging criteria. That means that here you can say what went well, what went wrong, and again, don't just talk about the successes, be reflective here. The next one is reflecting on how the project extended your knowledge, your understanding of the topic, and your global context. Now, this one is one where you might pick out a process journal entry you've already used. Maybe you learned a huge amount from your research. Maybe that is something that is really, really, really important to you. So maybe you're going to talk about Criterion A, Strand 3. Maybe, for example, you became just a better learner. You know that in grade 9, you always procrastinated, you avoided work, but through this process, you have become much better at being organized. Therefore, you might pick out a process journal entry from B, Strand 3. And this is one of those longer goals, so if you look at it, it really does break it down. You're talking about your knowledge and understanding of the topic and your global context. So make sure you talk about both of those. Again, this is why global context needs to be part of your goal and not just an add-on. Here you can talk about your exploration, and again, tell us, now that you understand your global context more, why is your global context important? For example, if you were looking at how say you've made a product like the homelessness pack that can help lessen inequalities in homelessness because you provided stocks for 50 people in Stuttgart. Tell us about homelessness across the world. Tell us about inequalities across the world. Why is your global context something important? Why do we look at the global context in MYP? And lastly, C, Strand 3, reflect on your development as an IB learner. Really, the IB learner profile is something that we have, which we want students to develop and teachers to develop and everyone to develop, right? Imagine if all of our presidents were perfect IB learners, the world would be much better. It's about how you're being a better person, how you're being more internationally minded. Don't just go through the IB learner profile list and pick out, I was caring because I helped others, I communicated because I sent emails. Try and make it a little bit less superficial than that. Think about kind of big picture things that you did, things that maybe you had, the characteristics maybe you didn't embody before and how you developed those. Talk about how the personal product has impacted you. And again, if your personal product, your goal is just about making a thing, you could say, I made a computer, I have a computer now. But if your personal project is about how systems help us develop new technologies, you can talk about, oh, now I'm going to understand how roller coasters are made and how MRI machines are made. This is going to help me in the future because maybe I want to learn about more different types of machines. Hopefully that makes sense. Sometimes for me, the IB Learner Profile one is, I think, some of the hardest ones for the students and often the hardest one for me to explain. Hopefully this whole presentation has kind of showed you how the process journal links to your assessment and the kind of evidence we'll need. Again, at the moment, you are just focusing on your particular product or outcome and having and documenting everything in your process journal. There are a couple of entries which everyone should do or help you, like doing a source evaluation or annotated bibliography and making clear and robust criteria. Otherwise, just keep working on producing the fantastic thing you're working on. I'm excited to see it. If you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.